My name is Marguerite Hardin. I'm from West Vancouver, British Columbia, where I've been running a family support centre for 14 years now. I actually was more or less the founder for our society. I volunteer for the North Shore Schizophrenia Society. We used to be affiliated with a provincial organization, but we're now independent. And we have a little drop-in resource center for family members, and we do quite a number of programs as well to educate the public, to assist families. We do public lectures. We do what we call partnership presentations in the schools to alert young people who are on the cusp of the vulnerable age for schizophrenia to some of the basic symptoms, and with the message that if you or somebody you know is having problems, don't run away and hide, don't desert them, reach out and help. Make sure they talk to somebody and hopefully get some help. We also have in that regard, we have a great focus on trying to warn young people about the dangers of marijuana. I know from my own personal experience with my son and from many, many families I've spoken to that marijuana can very definitely precipitate schizophrenia. This is now backed up by many, many studies. When I figured that out years ago, there wasn't any evidence, but it was my opinion. And I know I've read some studies now where scientists are of the opinion, because they're seeing an actual increase in the incidence of schizophrenia. There's a big study done in South London, UK, that probably some cases are developing that would not have otherwise manifested in a complete way without the use of the street drugs. I mean, marijuana is a particular villain because people think it's a harmless little weed, and they're not afraid of it. You know, they might have some doubts about stronger things like meth or stronger things, or cocaine, of course, which is long being known to create psychosis. But marijuana is very insidious that way, and because it is so ubiquitous in our society, it's like a plague in my view, because so many young people fall into that trap. My son was a brilliant little boy, always top of his class, or number 2 only, through finished elementary school, grade 7 with straight A's. He unfortunately started smoking pot when he got to high school, and had a little friend. He used to go off and listen to music and toke up every afternoon, apparently. And his first report card in grade 8 was nothing but D's and E's. And he literally could not think straight anymore. We got a call from his math teacher wondering what was going on. We were wondering what was going on already too, but it took us many years to find the answer, and it wasn't until he had a very severe florid break at 18 that he finally got a diagnosis. We had a number of years after that of very, very severe illness, incomplete recovery, going off meds, getting very sick, a doctor who didn't know the law we had, which probably would have allowed him to be committed in his second break. The doctor had trained in another province which required dangerousness as a criteria. But I discovered after the fact at that time our law would have allowed him to be committed for his own welfare. And yet he was so ill, he was lying in bed. We thought he was just too disorganized to go and get the groceries. We later realized that he'd been building up this very intense psychosis based on the record Jesus Christ Superstar. So he was Christ in the garden. He was supposed to be fasting. And he did it to the point where he was losing muscle mass. It was just pitiful. He was a fine physical specimen of 21, losing muscle mass, and nobody would do anything to help us. And later that summer, again, because of the intensity of his illness, he came to believe he was Christ. I managed to get him over to our house one day. We were desperately trying to check on him, find any little thing that would allow us to get help. And he announced that he was JC, his father was Judas and had betrayed him, and he was going to chop his head off with an axe. And I say luckily in quotes, he was then so ill he was catatonic and stood there staring for about 10 minutes, so that his father was able to actually run around the house backwards out of his sight and lock the door where the axe was kept. And I had already gone in the house to call the police for assistance. And was still explaining our funny little address to them when we heard him go and try that door. So it was quite a horrendous night, and including an elopement from hospital in the middle of the night because the sedative they gave him didn't quite hold and they didn't have a secure room at that time. But the very worst thing about that episode was that he was so incredibly ill, and this was in the days before the newer medications came in. They could not get the psychosis under control, and he was in hospital, well, most of the time, and with an unresolved psychosis for 4.5 years. Finally, with the meds change, he did recover. It was like a small miracle. But then after a few years, another relapse, another very severe break. And that time he spent 3 months in intensive care at our provincial hospital, just hallucinating day and night. Finally, it put him on a fast track to the refractory ward. A wonderful doctor started him on clozapine. And I was telling somebody out in the hall, he's a human being again. It's wonderful. Now we've got the health problem with the weight gain and other things. So it's things people need to know, and I'm sorry if I'm long. But I'm Marguerite Hardin, and I can talk about mental illness. I've done a lot of it, so I think everyone needs to do that who's had the experience.